Welcome to the Keeping It Real podcast by Real World Academy, where we hear from top educators, entrepreneurs, and creative thinkers on how to design your future. So welcome back, everybody, to the Keeping It Real podcast. I'm Domenico, the founder of Real World Academy, and we're here with Cassie Spencer, someone who shares the same passion and the same mission as Real World Academy, and that's to help students know themselves and prepare for an exciting future in today's constantly changing career landscape. So thank you, Cassie, so much for coming on.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
So why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself, how you became a career coach, and why you're passionate about this work.
Yeah, sure. So I've been a career coach for about 7 years now, give or take, mostly working in higher education settings. And I always preface with that because it's really how I fell into career coaching. I was a college student, kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I felt like I was doing everything like quote unquote right. I was doing internships, I was taking different classes, but just wasn't really sure what my path was. And so I started meeting with a career coach on my college campus. And through several of those conversations, one day it really just clicked. It was kind of that like stereotypical aha moment of my career coach kind of talking about something completely different. I think he was talking about gap year programs with me and that type of thing. And it just clicked. And I said, wait a second, how do I get your job? Like, this is a job, what you're doing right now. And I think I want to do that. And it kind of clicked from there. I was always the friend who was editing people's resumes anyways. And like, I was on LinkedIn early back then and trying to get all my friends on it and that type of thing. So it just kind of clicked from there. And he was like, well, go to grad school, get a degree in higher ed, student affairs, and kind of go from there. So that's what I did. And then fast forward to now, I'm a career coach. I have a podcast that focuses on career coaching, and I still spend a lot of time editing people's resumes.
That's awesome. I assume that you've gone through a bit of an evolution from the beginning of your career to now, because the job market has changed. Obviously, we're at a place where virtual work is here to stay. There are a number of different cultural shifts that are happening. So how has your career evolved, and how have you learned to adapt to such a constantly changing job market?
Such a great question. I think my career has changed from the sense that when I entered the field of career coaching and kind of, coming right off that story, had a very kind of direct path. It was like grad school, get a job in a career center on a college campus, work your way up. And then eventually the goal at the time was like become a director of a career center. But I think, like you're saying, as we've seen the market change and remote work and all of these other things that have happened in the last 7 years, 10 years, and that type of thing, and seeing the market change, also just as I've changed as a person and like life happens and your priorities change, that has shifted too. And I think, with my career in particular, I don't work in higher education anymore. I made that decision partway through like 2021 that I was going to make a change. And so at the start of this year, I fully launched my own freelance career coaching business and podcast and all of those types of things. I think partially because we've seen the market change so much and have seen opportunities change. And it was something that I really wanted to take advantage of. So kind of seeing opportunities become available. I was seeing other career coaches build out their own coaching programs and be really successful with it and have a lot of freedom to be creative and to try new things and to work from anywhere. And especially after, what we've all experienced throughout the pandemic and kind of being a little bit more isolated, I wanted some of that freedom and wanted to kind of have a little bit more control over my own career versus working inside the system that, I love higher education. It's a great system, but it is a system. And there's only so many things that I was able to do at that point in time working in that setting, which led to me wanting to move out.
And I assume you're able to work with a much more diverse client population now, because it's not only college students that need this kind of work. There's people
right
all the way people nearing retirement who need this kind of work. So maybe you could speak to that more. What are some of the commonalities you've noticed with people despite age differences? What kind of work needs to be done these days?
Yeah, I love this question, and I love answering it right now, and particularly because in the last couple of months since I've moved out of higher education, I've been working a lot with people who are further along in their career and more kind of approaching retirement. And it's been a really interesting kind of two ends of the spectrum of having worked so much with college students who are going through those exploration phases, kind of figuring out, what do I want to do? What do I even want to major in? What careers am I interested in? Kind of going through that process, to now working with people who are in their late 40s to mid 50s or older, and are kind of getting to that point where they want one more job before they retire, or they want to retire from the career that they've had for 20 years and do something that's just like a little bit more fun. And while that's not typically my normal demographic, it's been really fun to see some of those commonalities. So looking at people who are questioning, like, what do I even enjoy? Like, what are my interests and my passions, and how can I connect that to a career? Or having conversations again with kind of both of these populations about, like, what do you value? What's important to you? And you think about what you want your life to look like, whether that be for a college student who's looking at, the next 30 years of work, what do they want that to look like? Or someone who is approaching retirement is like, I just want the next 10 years to be fun and, make a little money. So I think that's the biggest commonality that probably maybe a lot of people listening wouldn't really think about, between someone who's just entering their career and someone who's on the edge of like exiting their career. But I'm having a lot of those similar conversations, and that's been really fun for me.
So you mentioned passion, you mentioned knowing what you like and what you don't like. Along those lines, what are the most important questions that students and recent graduates need to ask themselves to prepare for a career in 2022?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest questions that young people need to ask themselves, and that they really need to sit with, and I say this all the time, and I know it's like not the most fun thing to do, but to really ask yourself and to really take the time to figure out what you value and what's important to you. And I know I sat in, college classes and with my career coach in college, and people will bring up like these value card sorts, or they'll say like, what do you value? And that type of thing. And it's just this like broad question, but really kind of getting down to the things that are important to you and the things that you value, and really knowing what those are, I think is such a game changer when it comes to your career and when you have those values to stand on. And I would encourage anyone to, I think a values sort is a great starting resource, and to look at some of the words that come up. If you just Google like values sort or values card sort, they'll come up. But to like give you a little bit of freedom to come up with the words that identify the values that really are the most important to you, and to not feel like you're stuck to just those words that come up on a value sort. And I know that's something I struggled with for a long time, especially in the beginning of my career and like throughout grad school. I kind of was like, values, whatever. Like, I know it's important to me, but I didn't have anything to really back that up. I didn't have any words to say like, this is what I value, and I'm going to use those values to make decisions, or I'm going to use those values to ask questions in an interview about the things that are important to me, or, whatever the case may be. So I think really getting clear on those values, and then kind of adjacent to that, really knowing what's important to you outside of that too. So, for some people, it's having flexibility to work from home or to have a hybrid schedule. For some people, it's a certain location. They want to live somewhere in particular. And so jobs and careers surrounding that location. Salary, of course, can be something that's important to you, but also other things like what type of boss do you want, or what type of colleagues do you want to work with? What types of opportunities do you want to have through the work that you're doing? What impact do you want to have? Kind of wrestling with all of that can really help make decisions, and help you decide other things too, like, is this even a job I'm going to apply to? Or is this a job I'm even going to take when the offer comes?
I'm curious, how often do you have to give clients a reality check in terms of what they want and what's actually feasible in today's job market? Do you have clients who, for example, want to work from home 4 or 5 days a week and make the $200,000 salary? Examples like that. Do you have to bring clients back down to earth and give them a reality check to tell them what's feasible?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a combination of telling people what's feasible, but also encouraging them to dream a little bit more. So again, kind of like two ends of the spectrum there. I think there are certainly clients that I've worked with where the dream is so big and I love that and I want to support that. But the steps that it takes to get there, there are steps that we all have to take to get to any point in a career, regardless of what that dream is. And it's just recognizing that there are steps to this. And, I often say to clients, like, if I could wave a magic wand and just like poof, give you the career or give you the clarity or give you whatever that thing is you need, like I would, but there are steps that have to kind of go into it. And there is work that has to go into it. So moving up in that field or industry, whatever it may be, it's more of a reality check of like, here are the steps. Now, do you want to do that? Is that something you're willing to do moving forward? And then in the same vein, I work with a lot of people who are like, I just need a new job, or I'm just unhappy. And it's more of that reality check of like, okay, we can get you a new job, easy, but it's not going to change what you're experiencing right now if we don't kind of unearth some of that and figure out like, why are you unhappy in your job, or what is actually going to fulfill you moving forward?
It sounds like you're doing a lot of psychological work along with career development, which I suppose they go hand in hand. But you mentioned the first step is developing a value system and really knowing what your values are. What is the other work that goes into, like, what has to happen before you even decide on a career path besides values? Is it strengths and weaknesses? Is it passion? What are those other bullet points that you go over?
Yeah, I think looking at strengths and weaknesses is always important. And I kind of hesitate to say strengths and weaknesses because I do think it's more important to look at your strengths. What are you innately good at? What are the things that are already kind of drawing into you? Like the example I gave earlier, I was already editing my friends' resumes and it never clicked like, this is a career path, right? And so that's a very distinct, like exact example that I'm giving, but I also just always loved writing. I always felt I was good at it. I was good at coming up with words and using words and essays and all of that type of stuff. And so you can see kind of that direct connection now, but spending that time to think about what you're good at, what you already like doing. I think it can be really helpful to kind of go back through kind of regardless of where you're at, if you're in high school, college, somewhere else in your career, to just think about the things that you've done throughout your life. Like, what activities did you do in high school? What were you drawn to be doing there? Like, what did you enjoy about those activities? Because there are a lot of clues that we can pick up on through the past things that we've done, or kind of the roles that we play, right, in our friend groups and families and that type of stuff of like, some people are just natural helpers, or some people are more natural, like activators. They get stuff done and all of that. So thinking about that can be a really good step. And then I think the best thing to do from there is to pair that with actual experience. So whether that be a part-time job or volunteering or joining a club or organization, all of those things can help you kind of look at everything as a whole package and say like, okay, this is interesting and I want to keep looking at it from this lens, or this marketing that I've been doing for my club or organization in college is really fun and I love like tinkering with the graphics. So I'm going to keep thinking about this and like find another opportunity, and just using those little clues along the way to then make the next decision.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like this is really a exercise in self-awareness. And in order to know what career you want, a lot of times people say, what you do doesn't define you, but I would argue in many ways it does, not necessarily your job or your career, but an all-encompassing approach to your life. You have to be able to know who you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, in order to, organize your life in such a way to where you're fulfilled. And it's funny, that's the exact approach we take at Real World Academy as well, with students as young as, freshmen and sophomores in high school. So that brings me to my next question. Oftentimes, especially when you're working with a younger population, you have to infer and you have to see potential in them. Because let's say there's someone who's particularly introverted or has a leniency towards introversion, but wants to be in a leadership position. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can't do that, but they're going to have to work that social muscle in order to get to a place where they can do that. So where do you draw the line? How do you know if someone's just underdeveloped in a certain area, or if they should pivot and try something else?
I think that really comes down to like how willing is the person, right? So if they're going through, and I think just easiest to stick with the same example, if it's someone who's a little bit more introverted, but they're exploring options that, would require more of that leadership skill to be developed, and it's something that they're dreading every day, or they're trying and they just continue to not like it, it's not exciting them or giving them any fulfillment to be working on that skill or learning that skill or anything like that, then that's a clue to me like, okay, maybe we need to look at this from a different angle, or we need to look at what are some other opportunities that would still fulfill kind of that desire or that interest, but in a different way. And that's really how I like to look at things, is like, what's the picture? And then how can we kind of reframe it or look at it from a different lens? I think also like a really kind of beautiful thing about being introverted is that there's so much like research out there now and studies around the benefits of introverted leaders and that type of thing. So whether it's that example or something else, I think looking for other people who are doing what you're interested in doing, or who are doing something similar or with a similar background and that type of thing, can be really eye-opening for people and really kind of build some confidence for them that like, oh, someone else did it, so I can do it too. Or they're doing something similar, so I can do that and in my own way as well.
I want to get back to the introversion topic, because I think that's something that a lot of our audience will relate to. In any high achieving job, you're going to be required to do things that are outside of your comfort zone, whether you're introverted or extroverted. But you mentioned that there are certain advantages to having an introverted personality. I'm curious if you could touch on those.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest advantages of having an introverted personality is that kind of stereotypically, and I always tread a little lightly with extroversion and introversion, because innately we all just think about them in like two extremes, and that's often how we're taught about them. But a lot of times, stereotypically, someone who's more introverted is going to be a really good listener, and they're going to be really good at taking in information and kind of seeing how everything plays out or where all the pieces are, and then can make decisions from there or provide direction from there and that type of thing. And I think, in a lot of work settings, especially, having a leader that really listens is invaluable. Having a supervisor that really listens, again, really invaluable. And so that is kind of my like number one benefit of it. But I think the other thing that's important to think about too is that we all kind of are drawn to or respond differently to different types of leaders. And so, I've certainly had supervisors and leaders throughout my career that I've thought like, wow, you are way too over the top, and like it doesn't feel genuine and that type of thing. And whether that's true or not, that was their personality kind of against mine, right? Or how those two are coming together. Whereas I've had other leaders who I would say are very introverted, and same thing, you have those kind of different personality clashes. So it always depends a little bit too. But I think the other thing is that there are also a lot of introverted leaders who you would maybe never know that they were, because when you're seeing them in that leadership role, they're taking on kind of that lens of CEO or director or whatever it is, and they're doing what they need to do in that moment. And so you may assume like, oh, they're extroverted, but in reality, like they finish that meeting and they're fairly drained and like they need to go have, an hour by themselves in their office, or they're planning their calendar in a way that really benefits them and their personality.
What are some of those time management techniques to maintain a healthy work-life balance? Because a lot of this work is overwhelming, especially if you're starting from a baseline of not knowing much. So how do you encourage clients to not be overwhelmed?
Yeah, great question. I think looking at your calendar and like that example I just gave, kind of knowing what blocks of calendars, you can kind of do how you can block your calendar rather to work for you is really beneficial at any point in your career, whether you're a student and kind of still processing through and figuring some of that stuff out, or you're a full-time professional. So blocking your calendar and really learning how that calendar is going to work for you. When it comes to like career exploration, job seekers, that type of thing, I really encourage people to also work it into their calendar, a like steady consistency of whatever that thing is they're working on. So career exploration, applying to jobs or internships, that type of thing, so that there is this kind of consistency to it week in and week out, just like how you might schedule a weekly dinner with a friend, or, scheduling your lunches at work or whatever it may be, scheduling time to study for a test. You're kind of working that into your calendar. I often say, and I did a whole podcast episode about this as a guest on another one, about this idea of panic applying and how people, when they get into that sense of applying to jobs, it's a Tuesday night, it's 10 p.m. and they're like, oh my God, I need a job. And they're like frantically scrolling and applying, and they don't even know what they're applying to. And, then they're exhausted. They've submitted 20 applications, and it's just this like defeating feeling. And then they don't do anything for a week or two, and kind of the cycle repeats. And I think with really anything career related, we as humans have that tendency to like hit that peak panic and overwhelm, and to like just go all in. Like, I'll do anything right now that'll make this feeling go away. And then we kind of stay in this cycle. And so really trying to break that and create that consistency. I also encourage people with their career, because it can be so overwhelming, to like really take it one step at a time and to give yourself credit for the things that you're doing. So if you're someone listening who's like already done some volunteer work, or is already in a club or organization in your school, or has had a part-time job or something like that, you've already done something that's helped you towards your career. And you can take that experience and now spend 15 minutes, 30 minutes, reflecting a little bit and saying like, what did I like about that opportunity? What didn't I like about that opportunity? What maybe is a career that relates to this thing that I've already done? And just kind of ask yourself some of those simple questions, and you can kind of say like, check the box. Like, I did that this week. I've done something for my career this week, and then pick that next small step and to kind of work through it in those baby steps, I think is the best way.
Right. I'm noticing a pattern in our discussion, and it's that it's not a one size fits all situation when you're talking about this work. You're applying your knowledge base to so many different types of people at so many different stages of their life. So what are the techniques you use to really get to know your clients? Do you use a personality diagnostic? Do you have exercises that they do? What does that experience look like?
Yeah, great question. And that's one of the reasons why I really love what I do, because every conversation is so different. And I always joke that like the answer to everything career related is, well, it depends, is kind of that like starting point based on the person and what we're talking about. So with a lot of clients that I work with, depending on what they're working with me on, some people, it's a more holistic, like career exploration, everything into a job search, kind of whole spectrum type of work together. And sometimes it's much, much smaller. Maybe we're hopping on a quick 30 or 45 minute like Q&A. They just need someone to kind of bounce ideas off of, or also sometimes like I'm doing a resume update or something like that. So again, it depends. But I like to start with asking a lot of questions, many that we've already talked about today. Like, what is the person's goals? What are they hoping to get out of their work with me? And then based on that, kind of working backwards and asking questions that will help us get at like, how much work have they done on their self-awareness, knowing what they want, what they value, what's important to them, and also how willing are they to kind of work on that. And then based on those answers, we kind of then figure out like, okay, this is the approach or the strategy to whatever we're working on together. And we start with that. And then from there, depending again on the person and the situation, we sometimes work through that whole scenario, and then something's still not clicking. And I think a lot of work that I do around careers and job searching and all of that, it is this process of figuring out, okay, what's working and what's not working, let's keep doing the things that are working and let's adjust the things that aren't working. And then kind of working from there until that person has the clarity that they need, or, opportunities are presenting themselves for new jobs, things like that.
Right. I'm curious, what are some of the lesser known personality traits or behaviors that you analyze that would determine someone's career? Are there things that clients might not even realize about themselves, but then after you have mentioned it to them, there, certain doors open and certain opportunities arise? Do you have any stories like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people kind of very broadly, and this is probably just like a human trait in itself, is that a lot of people don't give themselves enough credit. They're sending their resume to me and they're like, it's not even good, or I'm like not even sure if I could make this career change. And for me, I often think a lot of my job is really connecting those dots and like pulling in the comparisons of what that person has done and what they're interested in doing, and kind of showing them like, these are the steps that we can take. So a client that's coming to mind right now, she had a phenomenal resume, like so much experience. She'd been in the field she was working in for 10 or 12 years or something like that, and was looking to make a career change, but nothing like crazy drastic. It's not like she was going from being a nurse to wanting to be like a music producer or something, like nothing too crazy, but had worked in corporate America, had taken on a lot of leadership roles, and was just looking to shift a little bit, and just really kind of down on herself, like telling me over and over again, I'm not even sure, like I don't even think my resume will be looked at, and just a lot of that self-doubt coming through. And so we did spend a good amount of time together, not only updating her resume and kind of developing a strategy for her to make this shift, but also really looking at like, there are so many skills that you have from your career that connect directly to the skills that you need in this new area. And so drawing those connections for her and really kind of spelling it out. Like we spent some time looking at all of the bullet points and these accomplishments that we were writing from her past career, and drawing that connection between like, okay, this thing shows that you have these leadership skills that you're going to need. These things show that you have the communication skills that this role or this field or industry would require of you. And really kind of building that bridge between the two things is a big piece of it. I think that's what people struggle with, is seeing how their skills and experiences connect or transfer to other things that interest them.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the most challenging experiences you've had with clients, biggest challenges you've had to overcome?
I think the biggest challenge for me as a career coach is working with a client who's not ready to do the work, or who kind of just wants that, like wave the magic wand and like, poof, you have all the answers. I really like the term career coach because I believe that's what I do. I'm coaching someone through the process and through the steps, and, providing as much guidance and insight and support as I can. But the reality, and I have to say this to some clients, is that like, I can't do the work for you. I can't just tell you like, oh, this is the one option you have, go do it, or tell them to sit and reflect and think about what they value or what's important to them. Those are just answers I can't come up with for them. So I would say that's the most challenging, when someone's not ready to do the work. And I think a lot of that really comes down to, there's a lot of like fear and anxiety and overwhelm that comes when you're thinking about making these decisions, or sitting with those thoughts to figure out like, okay, well, if I really figure out what I value, then is that going to change everything else that is in my mind and all of that. So, that's the most challenging. I do really try to provide that support of like acknowledging that some of the things in the work that I do is not fun. It's not fun to think about or fun to schedule in that time to do these things. And that there is a lot of fear associated with things like networking and interviewing and all of that. But working through that the best that we can. And one step at a time is always kind of my approach. Like we'll take this one step and then we'll do the next step and then on from there.
You mentioned the work that clients have to do to make it worthwhile. What is some of that self-work that they have to do, even separate from you, in order to prepare themselves?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of self-work that someone has to do and that we all should continuously be doing is really kind of looking at our mindset. And, I think mindset has really kind of become something that a lot of people are talking about more and more, which I think is phenomenal. And really thinking about what mindset you have going into some of these discussions around your career, your interests, your passions, and that type of thing, because it does play a role throughout the whole process of your career and kind of the mindset that you have going into a job search or going into an application process is going to affect it. And that's why I really like to break it down. I feel so repetitive, but into those like one step at a time, really managing your calendar, being consistent, but like slow and steady with it, because mindset does play a really big role. And anything career related, like we've talked about, can be very overwhelming and can, searching for a job is often in itself this time consuming and like draining process. And so going into it a really positive mindset, really secure mindset of like, these are the things that are important to me. These are the things that I value, is important. And kind of knowing what you need to do as an individual to get yourself back to that mindset when there is a disruption or a bump in the road or whatever it may be, I think is really important too. And incorporating that into the day-to-day is good. And those are just good skills to have anyways, regardless of what happens 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, like there's always going to be a rough day at a job or where you have to do something that you don't love or whatever the case may be. Things just happen. And so kind of knowing what those things are that you can do to like when I need to bring my mindset back to kind of be at peace with what I'm doing and to go through that process is really important.
What would be an example of a toxic mindset? What are those demons that are sounding off in someone's head that you encourage to get out of there?
Yeah, I think people in general thinking that they don't have any skills. And I hear people say that all the time, even just like off the cuff, if I'm having dinner with friends or someone will kind of joke and be like, yeah, well, I have no skills or like, I have no talent and that type of thing. And it's just simply not true. Everyone has skills. And even if you don't feel like, oh, this is a skill that's like, I'm so good at this. It's like, we all have skills. If you can write an email, if you can have a conversation with your friends, if you can do some of these like basic human things, those are skills, and we can work on those skills and we can recognize how you've used skills. And I think that kind of like demon mindset of like, well, I have nothing to offer is that really negative mindset that then bleeds into everything that you do. A career coach that I really admire, her name is Crystal Hicks. She did a blog post. This was a couple of years ago, I think, but a whole blog post on like, you need to believe in your resume. And that really has resonated with me ever since I read that one line in there of like, it's so true. You have to believe in your resume because that is your first kind of introduction to whatever job. In a lot of cases, someone's reading your resume, that's you on a piece of paper, and you need to believe the things that are on there. And then, of course, when you're in an interview, if you have those thoughts swirling of like, well, why am I even here? Or I'm not good enough to be here. I have nothing to offer this company. That's going to affect your answers, regardless of how much you've practiced, and that's going to affect your confidence and all of that. And it's just going to lead then to more challenging kind of moving forward in getting a job and that type of thing, versus recognizing, like I often tell people, the vast majority of the time, if you have an interview, you have an interview because that company sees some sort of value. Most companies, and of course there's always going to be exceptions, but most companies are not wasting their time bringing someone in for an interview if they don't see value. So kind of using that as a confidence boost, I think is a good strategy as well.
What do you say to someone who perhaps has been applying for jobs for a long time and hasn't been getting the results they want? When do you know to pivot and change? And when do you know to tell them to just stick it out? It's competitive. You got to keep trying.
Yeah, great question. I think with that, I always come back to, we need to look at what's working and what's not. So if someone has been, let's just say they've submitted 100 resumes and they haven't heard back at all, for me, that's an immediate clue of like, okay, we need to think about, first of all, what does your resume look like and cover letter? If you've submitted 100 and you haven't heard back from anyone, we need to look at those two documents. Second thing that is kind of a clue in for me, I always want to know, where are you finding these jobs and how are you applying? And I've often worked with students, especially, but also professionals throughout their career who will say things like, I've applied to 100 jobs. Or I once worked with a student who said, I've applied to 300 jobs and I haven't heard anything back. And immediately I knew, like, that if you've applied to 300 jobs, something is terribly wrong here. And the result was that that student had been using the quick apply button on LinkedIn. So, like, yes, he had applied to 300 jobs, right, but he had just clicked 300 times and not really applied, didn't tailor his LinkedIn. I don't even know that his LinkedIn profile was like completely developed, or encompassing the things that he'd done. So it's really kind of taking that pause to look at what's not working. And if you've applied to a bunch of things and you haven't heard back at all, then usually for me, that's like, we need to look at those documents. We probably need to look at how and where you're job searching. We potentially need to look at some networking strategies to make sure that you're like fully aware of like, what are you applying to? And is that something you actually want versus just putting in kind of some random keywords into, job boards and things like that.
Right. So what do you say to someone who, let's say, had to take a long break from their career? Let's say they were a stay-at-home parent for 20 years, and now they're in a situation where they want to get a job again, but they're not trained for today's demands. They've been out of the game for a while. What are those first steps that you would take to make yourself a competitive applicant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for anyone who's had any sort of career break, career interruption, that type of thing, the first thing to think about is, again, kind of coming back to those core questions. What's important to you? Because it can be really different. If someone has taken a 20-year break in their career to have a family and do all of that, and I'm just going to say, if they're like approximately in their 40s or 50s, their wants or needs out of a career may be different versus someone who took a 2 to 4 year break, is still kind of earlier in their career and that type of thing. So again, kind of knowing what's important to you, what you want out of that job, and that type of thing is kind of step one. The second step from there then is really looking at like, what can I be doing now that's going to help against some of those things? So whether it be a certification online that you can take to do a refresher on Excel or to learn a new skill. There's so many options with free courses between things like LinkedIn Learning and other platforms that are either free or low cost or have, month-long trials where you can get certifications and do skill building activities is a really great opportunity. I also really encourage people to look at volunteering opportunities. So looking at ways that they can get involved either in their local community through organizations that they're passionate about, but there's also a lot of volunteer opportunities that are available online right now. I really love using Idealist. They have a job board, but also a volunteer board, and you can filter by remote and causes that you're passionate about and a lot of other filters to find opportunities. And so I think those are two really good ways to do a couple things to start to kind of refresh some of those skills or to give you opportunities to work on skills that could help bring you back up to kind of what's currently happening in the market and that type of thing. It can also be a good way to start to build your resume back up so that an employer isn't immediately seeing like the last date of 2000 or something like that on your resume. And then, of course, getting involved in some of these things, especially volunteering, that can be a really natural way to start to build your network back up and that type of thing. Again, whether that be remote or in person, to start to network a little bit and get connected with people, learn about a specific industry, all of that.
So I want to close with one more question, and I'd love for you to give some specific details. You mentioned examples of things you could do to build your skill set to adapt to today's job market. What are some of the secrets of the industry? What are some of the recommendations you'd make for people, regardless of their situation, specifically for 2022? What are some of the hot techniques that you would recommend that people use in order to be a standout applicant in whatever situation they're in?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that people can do in 2022 is to really use the platforms that are available to them. And I keep that broadly so that I can give some more specific examples, but there are just so many platforms that are available to all of us right now, through different social media platforms, different ways to build skills, like all of that stuff, that it's a really nice way to kind of dive into a specific community and to be around people that have similar interests to you and all of that, and to network without really feeling like you're networking and that type of thing. So I'll give a specific example. Over 2020, must have been early in 2020, TikTok blew up and everyone's on the platform and that type of thing. And I'll never forget, one day I was scrolling, and of course I see some career related content because of how the algorithm works and all of that. But a video popped up. It was a college student, I assume, who was like, I'm studying sports management. I want to connect with other people who are studying sports management. Like, let's connect on LinkedIn. Like, I need to build my network. And it was maybe a 10-second video of just someone talking. And it was so fun for me as a career coach. Maybe other people wouldn't find this fun, but so fun to like pause the video and scroll through the comments and to just see all of these people being like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm in sports management too. Or other people, and then replies to these threads being like, I'm not sports management, but I'm sports medicine, or I'm this, or I'm that. And to kind of develop this community of people with similar interests and all this type of thing. And so I've seen that on platforms like TikTok. I've also seen that on platforms like Discord, where people are really able to kind of find these like niche communities where people have similar interests and they're willing to offer advice and support and all of that. And so I use those two examples to just say, like, there is so much opportunity out there and ways to connect with people and to learn from people and to network without it being like everything that comes to mind when you hear the term networking, that I think that's a really great thing to take advantage of.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think our audience got many nuggets of information that are going to be useful. So why don't you tell us about where to find you, your website? I know you mentioned that you host a podcast as well, so please give us that information.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And thanks for letting me kind of promote all this stuff. So I co-host a podcast called Your Career GPS. You can search Your Career GPS on basically every platform that you listen to podcasts, and we're there. I co-host that with another career coach, and we talk a lot about everything we've talked about today. We like to provide really practical career advice around any of this. So definitely scroll back through some of those episodes to find ones on things like values and other things that we've talked about that. In addition to that, I'm on Instagram at Career Coach Cassie. So you can find me there, and links to everything else I do through all of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Casey. And thank you everybody for listening to the Keeping It Real podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Keeping It Real podcast by Real World Academy. If you're a student looking for a mentor, or a parent looking to help your kid design a happy life and a successful career, visit our website at realworldacademy.org and subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and wherever you listen to podcasts to hear more exclusive content on how to design your future.